I have the pleasure of introducing Danielle Cover, who is a professor of law and the director of the Civil Legal Services Clinic here at the university. Her research focuses on the intersections of psychology and pedagogy in the experience of students. Her presentation today will include empathy and law in the classroom.
My research has really focused over the 10 years that I've been here on how we as educators in law classrooms specifically can make the learning and teaching environment more meaningful. And so I have looked always from the perspective of what we can do to shift culture in classrooms, to address unmet needs in the classroom, all of that. Pardon me. This is my shield. It's between you and me. I am now safe, but also parched. Okay, so what I want to do today is just hit for you sort of three areas where my research, as kind of informed by the Democracy Lab, is sitting. And the three areas that I want to talk about very briefly are empathy, worldview discrimination, and the democratic classroom. So in terms of empathy, in the last 25 years or so, the legal academia has really been trying to introduce the idea of empathy into the law classroom. It is in response, this movement, the shift is really in response to, the idea that the law is neutral. And so, when we think about the law, and many of my students still come into my classrooms with this perception that law is bright line, that law does not reflect values, that law is somehow independently, in a vacuum, rational, logical, offers solutions that work across the board. But we know that that's not true. The law, in whatever shape you're talking about, legislation, cases, politics, all of it is value laden. All of it is born of value and value choices. And those value choices, if you want to take it all the way back, are value choices made by the people who founded the system in the first place. So what we're talking about is white men who own property and how their values and their desire to perpetuate the value of those specific characteristics has influenced our system over time. So that the idea of bringing empathy into the classroom is really about challenging that neutrality. So what we want to do is offer to the learning space opportunities for other perspectives, other lived experiences within the law to be given room. Okay, so that's the first thread. The second thread is about what I've started calling worldview discrimination. Worldview discrimination has been the pushback to the introduction of empathy to the classroom. So worldview discrimination, let me back up for a second and tell you what worldview is. Worldview, in the way that I conceptualize it and the way that I've been writing about it, is the sort of normative way that people believe the world works and how it should work, right? So it is a set of values, a set of beliefs that come from all of the various places that we as human beings exist in. So, for instance, I was raised Catholic. I was raised in a military family. I went to college. I went to law school. Each of these experiences creates or influences, impacts the values that I hold. And that's true for everybody. Nobody is immune from worldview. It happens, right? We live in the spaces of the things we have experienced, good or bad. Worldview discrimination, as it has been, as I've been thinking about it, is the pushback that I get from students who say that when I bring empathy into my classrooms, that I have, by inclusion, created exclusion, that they are no longer in a place where they feel like the stories that have centered on them matter anymore. Sort of like pie, right? I love the pie analogy. I use it in a lot of different ways in my classrooms. But in this sense, I want to think about pie or the pushback on empathy in the classroom as if we allow perspective taking, if we allow other ideas into what are supposed to be neutral spaces, are we eliminating the room for the belief that these spaces are neutral, right? So, sorry. So this idea of worldview discrimination is that we've taken the pie and we've cut more pieces for some folks and eliminated the pieces for others. But we know that's not true, right? Like education is not pie. Education is the space for the exchange of ideas. And specifically, as a result of this project, I have been doing a tremendous amount of reading around the democratic classroom. The democratic classroom is an idea that I was introduced to because of this project. We read work by Miles Horton, who is the founder of the Highlander Center, and the idea of sort of creating democratic spaces. So I started to think about, is it possible to bring a democratic classroom model into a law classroom while we talk about empathy, or why we introduce to students other perspectives, other lived experiences of the law? And sort of over the course of this project, what I've sort of come to understand is that, or what I believe, I should say it that way, what I believe is that in its purest form, the democratic classroom allows for inclusion. It allows for voice. It allows for both representation and participation of all in the room. And again, in its purest form, I understand it to mean that the educator in the space is more of a neutral facilitator. But what does that mean for our students who have been traditionally minoritized, institutionally marginalized in these spaces? And part of the conclusion that I have come to is that the democratic classroom is actually, that democracy is not synonymous with inclusion. That if you think about democracy as a theory of existence, rather than centering individuals, it moves everyone to the center. But if we're talking about a democratic classroom, what we're talking about, what we may be talking about, is allowing a conversation to occur that becomes exclusive of the marginalized voices, becomes exclusive of the minoritized, because it is a space of majority rule. And that those two ideas are not necessarily compatible. So I don't really have a conclusion. This is still work I'm working on. And as everybody in the cohort knows, like this project has been through 6 or 7 different iterations. And so I suspect it's still going to change until the day that I have to give Scott a piece of writing to go. But this is sort of the thought process where I am and so where my project exists right now. Thank you.